The homeowner had been dreaming about this house for a long time. It was not a huge mansion, but it had everything he wanted: a small garden in the front, a driveway wide enough for 2 cars, and a little porch where he could sit in the evenings with a cup of coffee. Moving in had been exhausting, but worth it. He unpacked boxes for days, arranging everything just right. For the first week, he wandered around the neighborhood, feeling proud of the life he had built for himself. Everything seemed peaceful, calm, and normal. He waved to neighbors who passed by. Everyone smiled politely, some stopping to introduce themselves. There was nothing to complain about. Then, a few weeks after settling in, the first letter arrived. It looked official, typed neatly on letterhead, with the HOA logo at the top. At first, he thought it was a welcome note. But when he read it, his heart sank. The letter said something about his driveway being too long, that his garden had plants that were not approved, and that he needed to paint his front door a different color. He reread it twice, checking his memory. He had followed every rule the real estate agent had explained. The door color was exactly what the contract had said was acceptable, and the driveway was exactly as it had been shown in the listing. Confused, he sat down and read the letter again. It even mentioned a fine if the situation was not corrected within 30 days. He sighed and went to the garage to find the paint brochure he had used. It matched the colors allowed by the HOA. He took photos of the driveway and garden, checking every detail. Everything seemed right. He decided to call the HOA office to explain politely. A calm voice answered, promising that someone would look into it. He hung up, thinking it would all be sorted out soon. Maybe it was a mistake, but the next week, another letter arrived. This time, it said that some small shrubs in the backyard were too tall and violated HOA rules. The language was firmer, and it threatened more fines. He felt a knot in his stomach. He wondered if the HOA even knew the difference between legal rules and personal opinions. He remembered that the real estate agent had warned him that some HOAs could be difficult, but he never expected this. He tried to remain calm. He measured the shrubs, double-checked the rules in the packet he had received when buying the house, and confirmed that he was within limits. The letters kept coming, each one sounding more threatening than the last. It started to feel like someone was watching him, looking for reasons to complain. Neighbors began to notice the tension as well. A few stopped by to chat, asking casually if everything was okay. He tried to smile and assure them, but it was hard. They exchanged knowing looks, hinting that dealing with the HOA was never simple. One neighbor quietly mentioned that they had seen the board focus on certain homes more than others. It was subtle, but it planted a seed in his mind. Maybe this wasn't about rules. Maybe it was personal. He decided he needed to be extra careful and keep records of everything, just in case. Every letter, every email, every conversation would be saved. It felt tedious, but necessary. The weeks passed, and the pressure increased. The HOA sent inspectors who came without warning, taking photos of the property. They left notes with their initials, sometimes stapled to his door. At first he thought they were just checking for compliance, but it began to feel invasive. Walking through his own garden, he felt eyes on him, imagining someone measuring every plant. The joy he had felt when moving in was slowly fading. He missed the freedom of owning a home without constant scrutiny. Yet he refused to let fear take over. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong and that following rules carefully was his best defense. Late at night, he would sit on the porch looking at the stars, wondering how things had gotten so complicated. The neighborhood seemed quiet, peaceful from the outside, but inside his house, tension lingered. He kept thinking about the first letter, the threat of fines, and the idea that someone could try to take advantage of homeowners who were polite and compliant. He realized that many people might just give in, pay the fines, or change their homes to avoid conflict. But he did not want to do that. He wanted to live in his home without fear, and he wanted fairness. He didn't want to fight for fun, but he would fight if it meant standing up for what was right. Days turned into weeks, and the letters kept coming. Each one was slightly different, each one pointing out something new. A small crack in the driveway, a piece of the fence leaning a little too far, a flower pot in the wrong place. the homeowner began to notice a pattern. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were nitpicking, looking for any excuse. But he stayed calm. Every letter was cataloged. Every photo was stored on his computer. He even started keeping a notebook to record the dates of every interaction. It became a routine. Check letters, verify rules, take photos, record notes. It was exhausting, but it also gave him a sense of control. If they wanted to fight, he would be ready. One afternoon, he saw a board member walking down the street, glancing toward his house. The member didn't stop to talk, but the look in their eyes was clear. It was one of judgment, maybe even annoyance. The homeowner felt a surge of determination. He would not let a single person intimidate him or make him feel unwelcome in his own home. He reminded himself why he had worked so hard to buy this house. It was his space, his peace. And no one had the right to take that away unfairly. He started researching local housing laws, reading blogs and articles about homeowners' rights. Every night, he learned something new. Some HOAs had limits on what they could demand. Some had to follow specific legal procedures before issuing fines. And some were even vulnerable to challenges if they acted unfairly. He began to see a path forward. Knowledge was power, and he would arm himself with it. He wouldn't fight blindly. He would fight smartly, using facts and rules to protect his home. Through all this, he kept up appearances with neighbors. He smiled, waved, and chatted when people stopped by. He didn't want to create unnecessary drama. Inside, though, he felt a fire growing. He would not be bullied, and he would not let an unfair system control his life. The first letters had caused worry, but now they caused determination. Each new warning, each new inspection, only strengthened his resolve. By the end of the month, the homeowner had a stack of letters, a folder of photos, and a notebook full of detailed records. He felt prepared, even though the stress was still there. He knew the HOA expected compliance and silence, but he planned to do something different. He planned to stand his ground. He didn't know how it would end yet, but he was ready. He had a home to protect, and he would not back down. It was clear that this quiet neighborhood, which had seemed so welcoming at first, had a hidden side. But he would navigate it with patience, intelligence, and courage. For the first time, he felt the thrill of knowing he was capable of more than just following rules. He could challenge them, question them, and maybe even change the way things worked. The letters, inspections, and warnings had turned from mere annoyances into motivation. He looked at his house, the garden, and the driveway, imagining standing in front of the board, showing them exactly what was right. The feeling was empowering. He realized that ownership wasn't just about paying bills. It was about responsibility, respect, and knowing when to defend what belonged to him. And that knowledge was the first step toward reclaiming his peace. The homeowner thought the first month of warnings was stressful, but nothing had prepared him for what came next. It started with a phone call. A board member called in a firm tone, asking why certain plants in the backyard were not trimmed in the proper manner. He explained politely that he had followed the guidelines in the HOA packet and had measured everything carefully. The board member's voice grew sharper, warning him that fines could accumulate quickly if he didn't comply immediately. After hanging up, he felt his chest tighten. The warnings were no longer just letters. They were becoming personal pressure. He realized that ignoring them would not make them go away. The next day, another notice arrived in the mail, this time with a small envelope tucked inside, a fine of $50. It was the first one, and it felt like a punch to the stomach. He reread the HOA rules carefully and confirmed that there was no reason for this fine. He took a deep breath and decided to pay it reluctantly, thinking it might calm the situation. But a few days later, another fine arrived, this time for something as small as a flower pot placed near the porch. It seemed petty, unreasonable, and unfair. Each day, the homeowner began to feel tension grow like a weight pressing down on him. Even the neighbors were beginning to notice. A few approached him quietly, sharing their own experiences. One neighbor mentioned that the board could be strict, and sometimes targeted people who were newer or less familiar with the rules. Another admitted that they had once been fined for something trivial and had felt powerless. Hearing these stories made the homeowner realize he was not alone. but it also confirmed that the HOA had a reputation for pushing boundaries. He understood that he had to prepare himself, not just for letters and fines, but for constant scrutiny. The board did not stop with letters and fines. One morning, he noticed a car parked near his driveway with a person taking photos of his property. No one introduced themselves. No one explained what they were doing. It felt intrusive, almost like spying. He watched from the window, heart racing, unsure what the photos could be used for. The thought that someone could be documenting every detail of his home life unsettled him. He stepped outside and asked the person politely what they were doing. The photographer mumbled something about inspections and drove off, leaving the homeowner feeling uneasy and watched. That week, a group of board members appeared at his door unannounced. They inspected the garden, measured the walkway, and took notes. The homeowner remained calm, greeting them politely and answering their questions. Inside, he felt frustration rising. Why couldn't they respect his privacy? Why couldn't they follow a proper process? But he did not argue. He knew that any rash words could be used against him. He stood silently, watching them take notes, and reminded himself that knowledge and calm were his strongest allies. After they left, he reviewed his notes and photos carefully, making sure that nothing could be misrepresented in the evenings. He spent time cataloging every interaction, organizing letters, fines, and photos. He labeled everything by date, even noting small details like the tone of the phone calls and who had visited. The work was tedious, but it gave him a sense of control. He was creating a record, a shield against any false claims. This was not just paperwork, it was strategy. Each note, each photo, each letter became a piece of evidence, a way to protect his home. And every day, he became more confident that if the board tried to push him too far, he would be ready. He began talking with other homeowners more intentionally. Some were wary, afraid of angering the HOA, but others were grateful to share their experiences. They exchanged tips on how to document complaints and how to respond to fines. Slowly, he started to see that the neighborhood was divided. Some people quietly complied, hoping to avoid conflict, while others had learned how to stand their ground. This realization gave him a clearer picture of what he was facing. The HOA was powerful only if homeowners let them control their lives with fear. As weeks passed, the fines and letters continued, but he started to notice patterns. The board seemed to focus on small, personal details, the exact placement of garden decorations, precise height of plants, even minor changes to the exterior of his home. It was clear that their goal was not community improvement, but control. Instead of panicking, he began studying the rules more closely, cross-referencing every letter with the official bylaws. He discovered inconsistencies in rules that the board had misinterpreted or applied incorrectly. This gave him hope. If he could point out these errors calmly and clearly, he might be able to stop the harassment. One evening, he was sitting on the porch, notebook in hand, reviewing fines and letters. A neighbor walked by, noticing his tense posture. The neighbor asked quietly if he was okay. He smiled, telling them he was managing, though the truth was that he had spent countless nights worrying about every detail. The neighbor nodded knowingly, mentioning that the board could be relentless if they sensed hesitation. That conversation strengthened his resolve. He knew that fear alone would not win the day. He needed courage, patience, and strategy. The homeowner also noticed the psychological pressure of the situation. Each new warning made him anxious. Each inspection left him feeling scrutinized. But over time, he learned to manage it. He took long walks, focused on the small joys in the garden, and reminded himself that he was doing the right thing. Documenting every interaction, keeping records, and remaining calm gave him a sense of empowerment. He began to see the situation as a challenge, not just a burden. The constant pressure from the HOA had a side effect. It forced him to understand his rights, his home. In his neighborhood like never before, a particularly tense moment came. When a board member left a notice that implied legal action could follow. The language was strict, almost threatening. His heart raced as he read it, but he resisted the impulse to react angrily. Instead, he researched local laws that evening, comparing them to the notice. He discovered that the board did not have the authority to demand certain changes without following specific procedures. The realization was powerful. Knowledge had replaced fear. He was no longer a passive homeowner waiting for instructions. He was someone ready to defend his property if necessary. The homeowner began planning for the next board meeting. He imagined standing before them, calm and confident, showing the errors in their letters and fines, presenting evidence that the rules had been misapplied. This vision gave him energy and focus. He began practicing what he would say, organizing notes, and preparing documents. Each day, the anticipation grew, but it was different now. It was not fear or worry, it was determination. He was preparing to reclaim control over his home. And every fine, every inspection, and every letter was a step along the path. By the end of the second month, the homeowner had transformed. He was no longer just a victim of petty fines and unreasonable warnings. He was someone who had learned to respond with intelligence and calm. He had built a detailed record of every incident and had researched every rule carefully. The pressure from the HOA had made him stronger, more observant, and more confident. He realized that power was not given, it had to be earned through preparation and knowledge. The story of these weeks was not one of defeat. It was a story of quiet resistance, of a homeowner refusing to be intimidated. He had faced personal threats, fines, and intrusive inspections, yet he had maintained his composure. He had learned to protect himself without anger or rash decisions. And through it all, he had grown more connected to his community, aware that others were watching, learning, and sometimes silently supporting his resolve. The journey was far from over, but he had taken the first big steps toward, showing the HOA that their attempts to control him would not succeed. Each day, each fine, each letter only strengthened his resolve to stand his ground. After weeks of warnings, fines, and inspections, the homeowner realized that he needed to take a deeper approach. He could no longer just respond to each letter as it came. If he wanted to protect his home, he had to understand the rules better than anyone else. He spent long evenings in the living room with the lights on, papers spread across the table, laptop open, and notebooks full of his own notes. He read the HOA bylaws, the property deed, and local housing laws line by line. Sometimes the language was confusing and full of legal terms. But he took it slowly, writing explanations in simple words he could understand. He discovered that the HOA had overstepped in several areas. Some rules they were enforcing did not exist in the official bylaws, and others required the board to provide written notice before fines, which they often skipped. The more he read, the more he realized how much knowledge was power. He started making a detailed chart of every violation the HOA claimed, comparing it to what was allowed in the bylaws. For every letter he had received, he noted whether it had a legal basis or was just a personal opinion of the board members. This work gave him clarity. He could see patterns. The HOA targeted small details, things that did not affect the neighborhood at all, things that would make almost any homeowner anxious. But the board had rules they themselves did not follow consistently, which could be challenged. He also started reading case studies and stories online of other homeowners who had successfully disputed unfair fines or rules. He learned that many people simply paid fines or made changes because they didn't understand their rights, and the HOA knew this. The homeowner realized that standing his ground required more than patience. It required preparation, proof, and confidence. Every night he added to his notes, building a file that could be used if needed, in addition to understanding the rules. He began documenting his home meticulously. He took photos of every corner, every plant, every decoration. Measurements were taken carefully, written down, and labeled with dates. He wanted to make sure that when he presented his case, there could be no dispute about facts. Even small things like the height of a shrub or the angle of a garden path were carefully recorded. The process was time-consuming, but it gave him a sense of control. For the first time since moving in, he felt that he was no longer just reacting. He was preparing. Neighbors began to notice his dedication. Some were curious, some were impressed, and a few were quietly supportive. One neighbor who had lived there for years came over one evening and shared tips about how the board operated. They explained that the HOA was most likely trying to assert power over newer homeowners who were not familiar with the process. They suggested that he keep calm and continue to document everything. That advice was invaluable. The homeowner realized that he was part of a larger community of people who had learned how to navigate this system. He wasn't alone, and he didn't have to be intimidated. One day, a particularly aggressive letter arrived, threatening legal action if he did not comply with a minor change to the garden. The homeowner read it carefully and immediately compared it with his notes. According to the bylaws, the board had no authority to demand that change without proper notice. He felt a surge of confidence. For the first time, he knew that he could challenge them and win. He didn't act rashly, though. Instead, he wrote a polite response, citing the exact rules and requesting clarification in writing. Sending the letter felt empowering. It was not a confrontation. It was a clear statement that he knew his rights and expected them to be respected. As the days passed, he also began attending HOA meetings, first as a silent observer. He watched the board members interact with other homeowners, noting the ways they communicated, the rules they emphasized, and the tone they used. He realized that some members were genuinely helpful, while others were focused on control. Observing in person gave him insight into the personalities and motivations behind the letters and fines. He began to feel less anxious and more strategic. By knowing who was on the board and how they acted, he could plan his next steps carefully. He also connected with other homeowners who had faced similar issues. They exchanged advice on how to respond to inspections, how to document violations, and how to present arguments at meetings. They shared experiences of standing up to fines and, in some cases, winning. The homeowner felt inspired by their stories. Each success story reinforced the idea that knowledge, preparation, and calm determination could turn the tables. He realized that the HOA's power depended on homeowners' fear. Once fear was removed, the balance of power shifted. Late at night, he would review the stack of letters he had received, comparing them to his notes and photographs. Each letter was like a puzzle piece, revealing patterns and inconsistencies. Sometimes he discovered that the same board member had been responsible for multiple unfounded complaints. He marked these findings carefully, preparing for a moment when they could be used to demonstrate unfair treatment. It was a meticulous process, but it strengthened his understanding of the rules and his confidence in applying them. The homeowner also learned the importance of patience. He could not rush the process or react impulsively. Each response had to be deliberate, well-documented, and polite. Anger or emotion could be used against him. He practiced writing letters and responses, sometimes rewriting them multiple times to ensure clarity and professionalism. The work was demanding, but it reinforced his sense of control. By taking a measured approach, he realized he could turn the HOA's tactics into opportunities to demonstrate his knowledge and calm demeanor during this time. He began to see his home differently. It was no longer just a place to live. It was a symbol of his perseverance and determination. Each plant, each decoration, each feature represented hours of careful work and thought. Defending his home became a personal mission, not just a matter of compliance. He wanted to protect it for himself, for his peace of mind, and for the neighbors who quietly supported him. The struggle against the HOA was challenging, but it also strengthened his connection to the house and the community. One afternoon, a particularly strict inspector arrived without notice. Taking photos and measuring things he had already documented, the homeowner calmly greeted them, answered questions, and provided evidence that he was in compliance. The inspector seemed surprised by his preparation, leaving after a short visit without issuing any new notices. The homeowner realized that his meticulous work was starting to have an effect. Knowledge and preparation could change the dynamic. He was no longer a passive target. He was someone who could respond effectively and confidently. By the end of the third month, the homeowner had transformed his approach. He was well-versed in the rules, meticulous in documentation, and strategic in responses. Each letter, each inspection, each fine had become an opportunity to strengthen his understanding and demonstrate his rights. The constant pressure of the HOA had taught him patience, attention to detail, and self-confidence. He knew that the next steps would require him to be firm and assertive, but he also knew he was ready. He was no longer just defending his home. He was preparing to stand up and show the board that fairness, knowledge, and persistence mattered more than intimidation. The journey was far from over, but the foundation of his victory was already in place. After months of preparation, the homeowner felt ready. He had spent countless hours reading the bylaws, reviewing every letter, photographing every detail of his property, documenting each interaction with the HOA. Every step of the way had been calculated. He knew the board expected fear, hesitation, or submission. But he would not give them that. Instead, he planned to attend the next HOA meeting with calm confidence and clear evidence. The day of the meeting arrived, and he felt a mix of nerves and determination. He carried a neatly organized folder with all his documents, letters, photographs, and notes. As he walked into the room, he noticed the usual board members sitting at the front, their expressions confident. They were used to homeowners complying without question. Some members nodded politely, but there was an underlying expectation that this would be another routine meeting, that he would sit quietly and accept their authority. The meeting began, with the board discussing minor issues and approving previous minutes. Then it was his turn. He stood, introduced himself politely, and began explaining the situation. He spoke clearly, referring to the bylaws, highlighting discrepancies between the rules and the fines he had received, and showing photographs that proved his compliance. Every point was factual, calm, and precise. He avoided anger or emotion, focusing solely on evidence and legality. The board members' expressions shifted from confidence to surprise as he went through his points. One by one, he noticed that a few homeowners in the audience were watching intently. Some leaned forward, nodding quietly as he presented facts that contradicted the board's claims. He realized that he was not just defending his home. He was also showing others that the board could be challenged respectfully and effectively. This gave him additional strength. Speaking clearly and confidently, he made it clear that he was aware of his rights and expected them to be respected. The first board member tried to interrupt, but he politely asked to finish his explanation. He pointed out the specific bylaws the board had overlooked and highlighted how fines had been issued without proper notice. He showed documentation of each claim, demonstrating that he had been meticulous and thorough. The room was silent, except for the sound of pages turning. Board members whispered to each other, clearly taken off guard. The homeowner stayed composed, keeping his voice calm and steady, ensuring that every homeowner present could follow his points. One board member finally responded, attempting to assert authority, but he countered politely. Quoting the bylaws verbatim and referencing the evidence he had prepared, he made it clear that he was not attacking the board personally, but was asking them to follow the rules as written. The tension in the room was palpable. Other homeowners began asking questions, seeking clarification on points he raised. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted. The room that had once seemed intimidating was now filled with attentive listeners, some of whom quietly supported him. He continued to present each case, addressing fines, inspections, and letters, showing where they had violated their own procedures. Board members struggled to respond. Their previous confidence appeared shaken. Some admitted mistakes, others fumbled for explanations. Throughout it all, he remained calm, never raising his voice, never showing frustration. His approach was methodical and respectful, which made the board appear less authoritative and more vulnerable. The homeowner realized that respect and knowledge together could outmatch intimidation. During the meeting, few homeowners quietly shared stories of similar experiences. They had faced fines or threats for minor issues and were unsure how to respond. Seeing someone prepared, calm, and knowledgeable gave them courage. The homeowner's presentation was not just a defense of his home, it was a demonstration of how fairness and preparation could hold authority accountable. His quiet confidence inspired others and encouraged them to take note of their own rights and responsibilities. After going through all the points, he concluded with a polite request for the fines to be withdrawn and for the HOA to follow the proper procedures in the future. He emphasized that he wanted to maintain a good relationship with the board and neighbors, but expected fair treatment. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then, a board member nodded and said they would review everything carefully. It was the first acknowledgement that the homeowner had successfully challenged the board's authority in the days following the meeting. Letters arrived confirming the withdrawal of fines and the board's acknowledgement of procedural errors. One member resigned quietly, and the remaining members seemed more cautious in their actions. The homeowner felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. He had stood his ground not through anger or confrontation, but through knowledge, preparation, and calm persistence. His home was once again a place of peace, and he had earned the respect of neighbors who had witnessed the process. The experience taught him more than just how to handle an HOA. He realized that challenges often come in unexpected forms, and success requires patience, understanding, and careful preparation. He learned that authority could be questioned respectfully, and that fairness could be achieved without conflict. The months of careful documentation, research, and observation had paid off. He felt empowered knowing that he could protect his home and his rights if similar challenges arose in the future. He continued to attend HOA meetings occasionally, observing changes in the board's behavior and ensuring that procedures were followed correctly. Neighbors approached him with questions or concerns, and he offered guidance calmly and supportively. His experience became a quiet source of reassurance for others, demonstrating that one person's careful preparation could influence the behavior of a group and create fairness. Through this process, the homeowner grew not just in confidence, but in patience and clarity of mind. He understood the importance of strategy, evidence, and respectful communication. He had faced months of pressure and intimidation, but he had learned to channel frustration into preparation, fear into knowledge, and tension into strategy. The journey had been exhausting, but it had strengthened his connection to his home and his community by standing up in the meeting, presenting his case clearly, and refusing to be intimidated. He had changed the dynamic with the HOA. He had shifted from being a target of scrutiny to someone who commanded respect through competence and calmness. The board would now think twice before issuing unjust fines or ignoring proper procedures. The homeowner had not only defended his own home, but also set an example for others in the neighborhood, showing that fairness and knowledge were more powerful than fear. As he returned home from the meeting, he walked through his garden and looked around the house with renewed appreciation. Each corner, each plant, and each decoration represented not just aesthetic choice, but also resilience and determination. He had faced months of pressure, but he had responded with calm, patience, and careful preparation. His home had survived the challenge, and so had he. He understood now that true ownership was more than having legal rights. It was also about standing up for those rights, protecting one's space, and demonstrating respect for rules and fairness. The homeowner reflected on the journey. The constant inspections, letters, and fines had initially seemed overwhelming, but they had forced him to become more informed, more strategic, and more confident. He knew that challenges would arise in life, but he also knew that preparation, patience, and clear thinking could overcome them. The experience with the HOA had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. It had shown him the value of knowledge, the power of calm persistence, and the strength that comes from standing firm in what is right by the end of this period. The homeowner was not only respected by neighbors, but also by the board itself. He had proven that unfair tactics could be challenged, that rules must be followed properly, and that a homeowner's rights were not to be ignored. He could finally enjoy his home with peace of mind, confident that he had the ability to protect it, and that his efforts had made a difference, not just for himself, but for the entire community. After the successful meeting with the HOA, the homeowner finally felt a sense of relief. But he knew the journey was not entirely over. The battle had been long and stressful. And while the board had acknowledged mistakes and withdrawn fines, he wanted to ensure that fairness was maintained permanently. The first days after the meeting were quiet. No letters, no inspections, no fines. For the first time in months, he could enjoy his home without fear. He walked through his garden, checking the flowers, the shrubs, and the driveway, and felt a lightness that he had not experienced since moving in. The home finally felt like a safe, peaceful space again. Neighbors approached him in the following weeks, curious and impressed. They asked about the meeting, the documents, and how he had handled the board. He explained calmly, without boasting, emphasizing the importance of knowledge, preparation, and patience. Some neighbors admitted that they had been intimidated by the HOA in the past and had complied with rules they were unsure about. Hearing his story gave them courage. They realized that being informed and prepared could protect them as well. Quietly, he felt a sense of responsibility. His experience had not only protected his own home, but had become an example for others in the neighborhood. The board, aware that he could respond confidently to any unjust actions, became more cautious. They reviewed rules more carefully, followed proper procedures, and communicated more clearly. The homeowner noticed the change immediately. Letters were now polite and formal, inspections were scheduled and explained, and fines were rare and justified. The power dynamic had shifted. The board could no longer assume that homeowners would comply without question. This was a subtle but profound victory. The homeowner understood that his calm persistence had made a difference. As time passed, he reflected on the lessons learned from this experience. The months of stress, fines, and inspections had taught him patience, attention to detail, and resilience. They had also taught him the value of staying calm under pressure and the power of being prepared. He realized that challenges often come unexpectedly, and the best way to respond is with knowledge and strategy rather than fear. The experience with the HOA had transformed him from a passive homeowner to someone who could assert his rights and maintain his peace. He continued to maintain detailed records, but now for reassurance rather than necessity. Every letter, every photograph, every note was a part of his personal archive. It reminded him of the struggle he had faced and the careful preparation that had led to success. He no longer feared inspections or fines. Instead, he saw them as opportunities to apply his knowledge and demonstrate that fairness must be upheld. The process had given him confidence not only in dealing with the HOA, but also in other areas of life. Challenges no longer seemed overwhelming. They were simply situations to approach with calmness and preparation. The homeowner also began attending HOA meetings occasionally, not as a challenger, but as a participant in the community. He listened attentively, asked questions, and offered suggestions when appropriate. His presence became a positive influence. Other homeowners noticed his calm demeanor and careful preparation. Some began to follow his example, documenting interactions and understanding rules before responding. The neighborhood, once tense under the board's strict oversight, slowly became more balanced. Homeowners felt empowered, and the board became more accountable. One afternoon, a new board member asked for his advice on how to communicate rules more effectively and fairly. He shared his thoughts openly, explaining that clarity, transparency, and consistency could prevent conflicts. The new member appreciated the guidance. For the homeowner, this was an unexpected but welcome outcome. He had turned a difficult situation into an opportunity to improve the community. His efforts had not only protected his own home, but had contributed to a more respectful and understanding neighborhood culture. Through it all, he remained humble and grounded. He did not seek recognition or praise. The satisfaction came from knowing that he had defended his home and his rights with integrity and patience. The journey had been challenging, but it had also been transformative. He had learned to face pressure without panic, to use knowledge as a shield, and to act with respect and clarity. These skills extended beyond his home and gave him confidence in other areas of life. The experience had strengthened his character as much as it had protected his property. Over the following months, he enjoyed his home more fully than ever before. He planted new flowers, trimmed shrubs meticulously, and even added a small bench in the garden where he could sit in the evenings. The space felt truly his again. Each decoration, each plant, each carefully maintained detail was a testament to the patience, perseverance, and strategy that had guided him through the challenges. His home had become a sanctuary, a place of peace and accomplishment. The homeowner also took time to reflect on the human side of the story. The board members were not enemies. They were people acting within a system that had given them authority. by responding with calmness, preparation, and evidence. He had transformed a potentially hostile situation into one of respect and fairness. He realized that conflict does not have to be personal. Rules, fairness, and communication can resolve disputes effectively if approached thoughtfully. This understanding gave him a deeper appreciation for the balance between authority and responsibility, and the importance of standing firm while remaining respectful. He shared his experience with neighbors, offering guidance to those who faced similar challenges. He explained that understanding rules, keeping records, and approaching situations with calm confidence could prevent intimidation and ensure fairness. His story became a quiet source of inspiration. Others realized that they too could protect their homes without fear. The neighborhood gradually shifted from a place of tension and caution to a community where knowledge, preparation, and respect were valued. The homeowner had not only defended his own property, but had contributed to a culture of fairness and empowerment.